Hello, and welcome to the Metta Hour podcast with Sharon Salzberg. I'm Lily Cushman. I produce this podcast, and today we are returning with another episode of our kids series, episode 274. And this kids series is in honor of Sharon's very first children's book, Kind Karl, which is coming out on December 9th. So for this podcast series, Sharon is speaking with different educators, caregivers, researchers, all about the many ways that mindfulness, meditation, and loving kindness can impact children, as well as the family systems that support those children. So this is a way to just amplify the work of these amazing folks whose work centers in this area. And we're so pleased for this third episode in the series. Sharon is joined by Meena Srinivasan. Meena is an educational leader. She's a speaker and author. She calls herself an edupreneur. She has over 2 decades of dedicated service working to champion the fusion of mindfulness and social and emotional learning. She is newly ordained as a lay Dharma teacher in the Plum Village tradition. Thich Hanh calls her a precious ambassador of mindfulness. She was featured as one of Mindful Magazine's 10 Powerful Women in the Mindfulness Movement. And she gave a fascinating TEDx Talk in 2024 about all of her work with Tenderness. So we're thrilled to have Meena here with us for today's conversation. Meena starts this episode talking about the ways that she has aligned her inner life with her outer work, her early spiritual foundation in Hindu culture, and then one of the real pillars of her work, social and emotional learning. She gives some great tools for supporting kids in crisis and also preventing kids from going into crisis, and the importance of parents and educators' well-being in the mix. Meena shares all about her work at Thich Nhat Hanh's new School of Interbeing, as well as her work in transformative educational leadership. She also shares some really interesting information about the research that she's been part of at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, which is centered all around tenderness. She and Sharon also just talk about kind of how tenderness differs from compassion, vulnerability, empathy, and the role that tenderness plays in her work. Before we get to the conversation, I want to tell you a little bit more about Kind Karl. This new book coming from Sharon in December. It is co-authored by the wonderful Jason Gruhl. Karl is a tiny little crocodile with very large feelings, and this, of course, is Sharon's first children's book. It's for kids who are 4 to 8 years old. The book is a sort of adaptation of Sharon's book, Lovingkindness, and it is really teaching the superpower of lovingkindness to kids with really approachable language, these gorgeous illustrations. It's a really playful and thoughtful inspiration for kids to look inward with greater curiosity and kindness. So you can pre-order the book today, and we have so much fun swag that we're offering as part of a pre-order gift for anyone who gets the book before December 9th. Lots of stickers, coloring sheets, temporary tattoos, bracelet, postcards. So lots and lots of fun things. And whether you are a parent, an educator, a grandparent, a family friend, this makes a great gift for kids, and it's a great way to kind of share in these teachings that so many of you have benefited from and bringing them to a younger generation. So all the details are at sharonsalzberg.com. And also Sharon is doing a number of events to support the book. There is an actual book launch happening virtually that is hosted by the IMS Book Club on December 9th. So you can join us for that. And of course, we have other episodes coming out in this series. We'll be running it through the end of the year, and you can check out the first ones with Susan Kaiser Greenland and Chris Willard. Okay, so that's all the fun information, and let's get into this podcast. Meena Srinivasan and Sharon Salzberg.
Hello, Meena, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sharon. It's wonderful to be with you here today.
It's wonderful to be with you. It's been a very long time. So, how are you and where are you recording from?
I am well. I wanted to say congratulations on kind Karl, our lovable crocodile who learns to be kind to himself so he can be kind to others. And I actually read it this weekend with my son, who is 7. We loved it. And
I'm
it's
so
just
glad.
such an accessible, engaging support for sharing mindfulness with young people. And I'm excited to talk about it more today. But I'm joining you from the foothills of Deer Park Monastery in Escondido in San Diego County, California, which is a beautiful practice center in the lineage of the late Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. And my family is actually the first family to move here to the foothills to help establish the Thich Nhat Hanh School of Interbeing, which is a new K-8 school opening in the fall of 2026. So I'm a proud parent and founding board member, and it's definitely a working board, but my son Kailash will actually be one of the school's first students. And so Deer Park Monastery is also located on the ancestral territory of the Kumeyaay and the Luiseño people. And at Deer Park, we really strive to honor that legacy, the spirit of harmony and deep reverence for all beings. Because long before the monastery was established, these indigenous peoples lived and loved and practiced their ways of harmony on this land. And having been here for a couple months, I can say that their presence is still very much felt here.
Wow, thank you. I'm very excited to have you as part of the series we're doing on the podcast, which is really exploring the benefits of meditation or mindfulness for young minds. And your research and leadership in the realms of mindfulness and social emotional learning and belonging is so valuable to the strengthening of education systems in a more holistic way. So I read recently about your upbringing as the daughter of Indian immigrants and how your intuition led you to become a teacher, eventually connecting you to your spiritual path. So I wonder if you can share more about your personal journey with mindfulness and how your early life has led you to the work you do today.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Sharon. I often reflect on just how grateful I am to be born both Indian and American in this life. And my dad immigrated to the United States in 1970 with $200, and my mom came in 1973, and they really built a life here, brick by brick, kind of, guided by that immigrant dream of education and achievement and all of that. But at the same time, my childhood was really steeped in Hindu ritual and devotion. And I still remember every morning waking up to the smell of incense and the sound of chanting. And my mom would be blasting her prayers while cooking Indian food before she headed to work. And from an early age, I was really invited to cultivate a personal relationship with the divine, to really see the sacred in everything and in everyone. And, it reminds me of just how I often think of myself as a bhakti Buddhist, as sort of that devotional path is equally important to me as my Buddhist path. And I actually remember, Sharon, asking you a question when I met you in India almost 20 years ago about the retreats that you would do at Krishna Das and about this kind of the Bhakti Buddhist sort of marriage. And I remember you looked at me and you said, there are so many ways to open the heart. And I never forgot that. But, both my grandmothers were married really young. My paternal grandmother in particular was married at the age of 13 and spent most of her life growing up in pre-independent India. And, a few years ago, I asked my mother, and my mother too was married young and arranged marriage. And I remember asking her, have there ever been any women in our family who have been free? And she looked at me, was silent, and then said no. And that moment really stuck with me because I think, being born and raised in this country, I've been afforded a lot of external freedom that the women who've come before me in my lineage haven't had access to. And at the same time, just have also felt this calling to cultivate that internal freedom really through a spiritual path. And I think, you know, something every young person is searching for in their own way is, this journey of identity, belonging, and agency that we talk a lot about in the world of social and emotional learning. This, who am I? Where do I belong? And how can I shape my life in a way that feels true? And I think those questions were alive in me long before I had language for them. And so, like many children of immigrants, I followed a very conventional path in terms of, this this more narrow version of what success looks like. So going to the right college and working really hard. And, I studied at Amherst College and the London School of Economics and, had a lot of professional experiences at places like Reuters and NBC and UNESCO. And after I graduated from college, I even had a job lined up at the ABC network and my career seemed set. But the summer after college, I was living in New York and I remember I was interning at Bloomberg News and I had what can only be described as like a spontaneous awakening. And I'm guessing we can get a little woo-woo here on your podcast.
Sure, why not?
But, it was this experience of just feeling this deep sense of interconnection. Like everything was an extension of me and I was an extension of everything. It was kind of a glimpse into what Thich Nhat Hanh calls the ultimate dimension. And after that experience faded, I was really left with this question that has kind of become the compass for me around like, how do I live from that truth in the midst of ordinary life? And so after that happened, and I was 22, and I really couldn't pursue a life that felt disconnected from that journey. And so I actually deferred my start date at the ABC network and I accepted a teaching position in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And in Sao Paulo, I was teaching at an American school. And I think part of me also thought this was going to be my year to like have fun before I started my life in New York after college. But I fell in love with teaching and I was introduced to the work of Parker Palmer and this book, The Courage to Teach, where he talks about how we teach who we are. And, I had this spiritual foundation in my childhood, but it really started to kind of root and take bloom after this experience and really saw how teaching could be a form of spiritual practice. But after a year in Brazil, I went back to New York to ABC and literally the light kind of drained from my days. And, I'm thinking about, Parker Palmer also talks about how our deepest calling is to grow into our own authentic selfhood and find our path of authentic service in the world. And I kind of realized that I was an educator at heart. And, that realization really kind of set the course for my life's work. And so I left New York. I moved out to California, and I was in graduate school at UC Berkeley. And I remember I was studying with a spiritual teacher at that time who would often speak about Thich Nhat Hanh as a living kind of enlightened master, and seeds at that time were being planted for a path I couldn't yet see. And also at this time, I had this unexplainable calling to move to India. And I remember telling my parents, and they were totally bewildered. They had left India decades earlier, and here I was choosing to return. But I really knew kind of in my heart that I had to get to India. And so I actually spent ages 26 to 31 living there. And just days after I landed in India, I met the late Professor Ramchandra Gandhi, who was a grandson of Mahatma Gandhi and a student of Ramana Maharishi, who's this great teacher of self-inquiry. So we think back to kind of this journey that a lot of adolescents go on around, who am I? And like Ramana Maharishi's central teaching is, who am I? And when I think of contemplative practice, this cultivating of our capacity to really be a witness. And so soon after I had moved to India, I had also had the chance to meet Thich Nhat Hanh, and I'll never forget the first time I was in his presence. It was at Gandhi Darshan in Delhi, where Gandhi's eternal flame is lit. And he asked us to sing a bhajan, a Hindu devotional song, to Lord Shiva. And kind of in that instant, I felt this complete permission to really weave my bhakti kind of devotional roots with Buddhist practice, and that both paths really belonged, and both were home for me. And it was actually around that time too, Sharon, that I met you at the India International Center. My friend and mentor, Shantam Seth, Adam Engel, I don't know if you remember this, brought you there, and you were giving a talk on faith.
Yeah.
And it was right after I had returned from a pilgrimage to Tiruvannamalai, where Ramana Maharishi, where his ashram is, and my Professor Gandhi had transitioned, and his ashes were scattered there on the Arunachala mountain. So I went there to do a pilgrimage, and I just returned that weekend, and I came to hear your talk. And you talked about bright faith, verified faith, and abiding faith. And it was so powerful for me because I had just come from doing this pilgrimage that was really rooted in this path of inquiry, right? This path of like inspiration to inquiry to an embodied knowing. And when I think about that talk, it's so interesting because one of the only questions I ever asked Thich Nhat Hanh was, what is faith?
Oh, interesting.
He looked at me, and this is the only time I ever spoke to Thich Nhat Hanh, the only question I asked him. And he looked at me and he said, faith is trusting and having confidence in your capacity to fully awaken your Buddha nature. And so, for me, that kind of the devotion and heart of that bhakti path and that path of inquiry that's so central to Buddhism, strengthening our capacity to be the witness, are really foundational to kind of how I move through the world and make sense of the world. And so, my own search for identity and belonging and agency really became the foundation of that calling.
Oh, wonderful. There's so many things I'm thinking. Like, I went to India in 1970, and as your father was coming here, and found, of course, a tremendous sense of home there. So it's really fascinating. So you shared an article preview about a piece that you've been writing for the Mindfulness Bell, and you mentioned the personal realization of teaching becoming the way you've aligned your inner life with your outer work. And I wonder if you can describe that process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, for me, whenever you are holding space, whether it's in a classroom or as a leader or as a parent, there is this real sense of how what is happening internally really does affect what's happening externally in the environment. And so, um, I think after I had that experience when I was 22 and, immediately after had my first teaching job, I kind of began to understand that alignment isn't a one-time event. It's sort of a daily practice. And I'm thinking about, this reality that kind of whatever is unhealed or unseen within us, how that shows up in our teaching, our parenting, and our leadership and our relationships. And so often, in our work with educators and the work that I've been doing over the past 20 years is this sense of kind of the unwritten curriculum is the educator's presence. And so, I think for me, that sense of what's happening internally, I've seen, up close and personal, how that unfolds in my external environment and the way in which I, am with my son or my husband, or even when I was in the classroom, or even the work I do now, really supporting adults in their capacity to lead with emotional intelligence.
So you mentioned earlier that this special series on the podcast is coming about because of the publication of my first children's book, which is co-authored by Jason Gruhl. It's called Karl, a little crocodile with big feelings. And I've been wanting to speak with different educators about all the various facets of bringing tools of meditation, of mindfulness and loving kindness to young minds. And so much of your expertise revolves around social and emotional learning, abbreviated commonly as SEL. So I wonder if you can start by first explaining what social and emotional learning is and why it seems so important for children today.
Sure, definitely. Well, very simply, social and emotional learning, they're the skills we need for life success. And it really is about cultivating the inner and interpersonal skills we all need to thrive. So, self awareness, self management, empathy, relationship skills, ethical decision making. And I think, in the mainstream, they are often called soft skills, but they're not soft skills. They're actually metacognitive skills, and they're the human skills that make all other learning possible. So I often say that social and emotional learning creates the conditions for that academic learning. And when we help children understand and regulate their emotions, listen with empathy, take responsibility for their impact, we're giving them tools for life, not just for school. And social emotional learning, or SEL, is especially vital now when so many young people are navigating anxiety, disconnection, and the rapidly changing world we live in. And so, social emotional learning really helps us restore belonging and balance and that inner steadiness from which learning and well-being emerge. But I will say, Sharon, that, I sort of position myself as really being someone who is in the world of contemplative SEL. And I had the gift of, a lot of people, may start their work in the social emotional learning space and then discover mindfulness after. And we even see that in a lot of the programming that's out there where they'll tack on the mindfulness exercise to the social emotional learning program. But for me, my path really began in that kind of contemplative space. And then I discovered social and emotional learning. So I feel like I have an equal foot in both worlds. And we can talk a little more about that as well.
And I'm wondering, well, two things. One is, what do those practices look like in a classroom environment and at home? And then also, how does age factor into SEL practice? And do you have various tools for various age groups?
Yeah. Well, in classrooms where social emotional learning and mindfulness are integrated, I feel like the environment itself kind of becomes a teacher. And so, for example, teachers could begin the day with a mindful moment, 3 breaths together, short reflections, gratitude circles. And these rituals can really help students arrive and kind of integrate their body and mind. So even when I was in the classroom before I became a school administrator, um, I'd say to my students, all right, our bodies are here, but where are our minds? Are our minds still at recess? Are our minds still in science? And so let us take a moment and, help ourselves arrive and really integrate our body and mind and establish ourselves in the present moment. And so during lessons on a very practical level, educators invite students to pause, notice emotions, name what they feel. And, I was reading recently, I think only 1/3, and this is adults we're talking about here, but only 1/3 of adults can accurately identify what they're feeling when they feel it. And so we're not a very emotionally literate society. And, I even see with my son, what a gift it is to even give him tools and language to be able to touch into, what is he feeling? Where does he feel it in his body? And also to recognize that these feelings come and go. That in and of itself is so empowering. And I think something beautiful that your new book, Kind Karl, does. Um, and at home, I think parents can also model these habits of taking a sacred pause before they respond, And children really learn emotional intelligence less from what we say and really from how we show up. And so you had asked about different age groups. And so, early childhood, I think sensory and movement based practices are really helpful. Even something as simple as inviting a bell and inviting them to listen to it all until they can't hear it anymore, or favorite practice of my son when he was in preschool, and a very basic practice, but one that we would often do together is, do you know, smell the flower, blow the candle? Sharon, is that what you?
No. Oh, tell me. Is that breathing?
It's breathing. And you kind of, my son would sit in my lap and we would pretend we were smelling a flower. And in fact, when we were outside, if we were near a fragrant flower, we would try to smell it and really take in the scent. So smelling the flower. And then we would blow out a candle. And it was so simple and so accessible. And even at the age of 3, we would do it together. And so practices like that. And again, it's a bit of also, just seeing what lands. We know mindfulness is not a panacea, and we have to just see what works for ourselves. And in turn, what is really landing for young people. But I will say, from personal experience, early childhood, that really engaging our senses was a really powerful way to access the present moment. And then in elementary school, really introducing those naming of emotions, with basic emotions, storytelling. So resources like Kind Karl, and there's some wonderful mindfulness-based books out there these days can be really supportive. And even just the practice of appreciations, really building that into our routines and rituals. And then in middle and high school, that's when I really feel we have to support that inquiry into identity, belonging, and purpose. And for teens, there really needs to be kind of that relevance and authentic dialogue. And one thing I did want to know about the research with teens in particular, and I was recently connecting with one of my friends, Mark Greenberg, who I'm sure you know, and what we know from the research now, at least around teens, that in almost every large independent study in different countries, for standalone mindfulness programs for middle and high school, there was no to very little effect. That doesn't mean mindfulness isn't useful, but I think in the field, we've really recognized how important it is to pair it with broader social and emotional learning competencies, the ones I described earlier, and relational practices. Otherwise, it's not likely to have a lasting impact. But what we do know is that when mindfulness and compassion-based programs are woven into a whole school model and are supported by adult practice, which is so key, that the results can be transformative. And so, I talked a little bit about early childhood, elementary, middle, and high school, but the most important group that we need to be thinking about are the adults. Because when adults are able to really cultivate a sense of balance and centeredness in themselves, emotions are contagious. It's researchers call it emotional contagion, and really, it's the adult's nervous system, which is the most powerful intervention in the classroom. And so, when we're thinking about social and emotional learning, that adult piece is so vital, is so key.
Well, I know that working to change systems can be really complicated. I'm much more familiar with the healthcare system than with education, but I'm sure there are some parallels. So sometimes that effort toward change is met with skepticism or pushback. And I wonder if you can describe some common, perhaps misconceptions people might have about this work.
Yeah, well, I think the heart of one of the biggest misconceptions I still encounter is the belief that social and emotional learning is about fixing kids or managing their behavior rather than transforming the conditions that really shape their lives. And, this sense of social emotional learning is something being done to kids, a program, a curriculum, a checklist, when really it's a shared human practice that begins with adults. We know that children learn most deeply through modeling. And, kind of what I was sharing before, that the importance of really prioritizing the adults. And so often, right, we want to just go right to the young people, and we forget how important it is to really invest in the adults that are supporting young people. So, if we want to support young people's well-being, we have to invest in the adults who are holding them every day. And that research is really clear that teacher emotional intelligence is one of the strongest predictors of student success for both their well-being and their academics. And when the adults are centered and supported, students are more likely to thrive. Another thing that's really come up, I was just in San Francisco last week speaking at a youth mental health event, and the whole conversation was about intervention. What to do once kids are already in crisis. And intervention is important. Kind of in my work, in my field, we talk a lot about tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And tier 1 is really that kind of universal social and emotional learning instruction. And the real work is that prevention. And, the other thing that really struck me when I was at this mental health gathering is that we're not actually talking about the root causes. And I'm a real fan of the work of Dr. Lisa Miller. I don't know if you've heard of Lisa Miller. She's at Columbia, but she's done a lot of research on kind of the spiritual core of well-being. And I think about how we've built education and mental health systems that really reinforce that sense of separation between mind and body, self and community, humans and nature. And that separation, that dualism, is really the heart of our suffering. And so when I think about contemplative SEL and how it's different from more traditional SEL, is that it really is engaging in these practices to cultivate that sense of interconnectedness. And so, contemplative practice and social emotional learning really aren't kind of the self-improvement tools, but really pathways to remembering, what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about your work with Thich Nhat Hanh's School of Interbeing, of which you are a founding board member. And I know your heart is really focused there a lot these days. So I wonder if you can tell our listeners about the project and when the school is set to open.
Yeah, well, the Thich Nhat Hanh School of Interbeing is a new independent K-8 lab school that is opening in the fall of 2026 on really at the initial location is at the gate of the monastery of Deer Park Monastery in Escondido, California. And it's actually across from an organic farm called Happy Farm. And we plan to open K5 next fall with the intention to grow K8. And I think the most important thing to share here, Sharon, is that this isn't just a school with a mission, but it's a mission with a school. And that the school, I think what makes it unique is that there is this vision to, eventually also have an elder care home next to the school. And it really is in the monastery's embrace. And so there is this living practice center that surrounds the school, and the school is really being cultivated in partnership with the monastery. And we also have an emerging research partnership with the Harvard Graduate School of Education to really study contemplative learning, because in public education, this is going to be an independent school. Oftentimes the work of mindfulness-based social emotional learning, contemplative SEL is just relegated, right, to the 20 minutes, 20-minute lesson in the day. And you're not able to really have that be the foundation or the fabric of the school. But with this particular school, contemplative learning really is the foundation. It really is creating those conditions for learning. And the hope is that it's a lab school, and that we create a replicable model so that there will eventually be Thich Nhat Hanh schools of interbeing, all over the world. I think our dream is that, when you're looking for an alternative path, and you Google for that, you don't just get, the Rudolf Steiners and the Waldorfs and the Montessoris, but that you will also be able to find those Thich Nhat Hanh schools of interbeing. So it's an ambitious, exciting vision. But it's also, this first location of this lab school is really nested within a living intergenerational ecosystem. And the community is also curriculum. There'll be a parent sangha is part of the vision as well. And in many ways, it's also a way to bring to life the manyfold sangha, monastics, lay people, children, really all learning and practicing together.
I find it so interesting how there's such an emphasis on community as part of this schooling model, given how important sangha or community is in other aspects of spiritual life.
Yeah. Well, when I think about Buddhism, coming to the West, and one of those important pioneers, Sharon, in bringing these practices to the West and offering practices that help folks here, really alleviate their suffering. And I heard a term recently. I think, we've a lot of us will be familiar with the term spiritual bypassing, but the term I heard was cultural bypassing. And it was shared in reference to bringing, these practices to the West, but the focus on the practices and the teachings without really taking into account the cultural context or container, right, and the Sangha. And I think what's really unique is Thich Nhat Hanh, would say, that the next Buddha is the Sangha. And one of the things that is really beautiful about this lineage and this tradition is this emphasis on Sangha. And I think also because it is still deeply connected to the Vietnamese cultural context from which it is born. And so that emphasis on community is such an important part of this lineage and this tradition. And actually, our vision at the school is that our students, that it is in service, their learning is in service of being community builders. So that's something we've really landed on as a founding team, is that everything is in service of community.
And another aspect of the project that's really striking to me is Thich Nhat Hanh's vision for the support of an educator's personal practice, which really does speak to interbeing, for one thing. And it really speaks to the importance of caregivers and teachers' well-being. And I wonder if you could say something about that.
Yeah, well, one of the my first retreat I did with Thich Nhat Hanh was in Dehradun, India, close to 20 years ago. And it was a retreat for educators. And 500 educators gathered for this retreat that I really, if I did a timeline of like the mindfulness and education movement, like this retreat would definitely be on there, because it was a turning point, definitely within the Plum Village Sangha, but I think even in the wider mindfulness and education movement. And so, Thich Nhat Hanh has always emphasized the importance of family practice, and children always welcome at the monastery. They would be there for the first part of the Dharma talk, always. And I think that's why, for me in particular, as a householder, I've been really drawn to this practice in community, because there is this emphasis on family and on practicing together. And educator well-being is very central to our design, with the school, because we recognize that, if our cup is not full, right, how can we offer anything to the young people? And the same thing for the parents. Parenting can be so isolating. So being able to parent in community is a gift, and it really is a revolutionary way of being together and of approaching education. So we're really trying to build a model of care where the inner life of educators and parents are honored in this environment.
And do you have some suggestions for ways that parents or caregivers who don't have access to this kind of education model for their child, how can they support their children with some of these tools at home or in more traditional educational models?
Yeah, well, I think, very simply, like a simple way to start is start with a conscious breath before you speak, teach, or respond. Just that simple practice can create a shift. And I think also just to really listen, to really listen to young people. And, in terms of how to bring this, into our family life, it starts with ourselves, to really prioritize that caring of ourselves is so vital, is so important. And so finding, what works for us. And, just also kind of on a practical level, I found that mindful eating can be a great starting point as well. We all have to eat. And Thich Nhat Hanh sometimes, he'd say, like, sometimes we eat our worries and our fears, but again, kind of engaging our senses and the practice of really tasting our food and smelling our food, that in and of itself, if you could even spend just a part of your dinner with your family, just really engaging in that practice of mindful eating can be really powerful.
Those are wonderful suggestions. Thank you. So I'd like to visit your 2023 TED Talk, Unlocking the Secret Powers of Tenderness, great title, in which you asked, what is the essential ingredient that makes us truly feel like we belong? And answered, tenderness. So tenderness, of course, overlaps with compassion, with vulnerability, with empathy, but it is also a little bit distinct. So I'm wondering how you define tenderness and how you landed on tenderness as the answer to this very
Mhm.
profound question.
Yeah, well, this really relates to my professional work. Feels weird saying professional because for me, the professional, the personal, the spiritual, I'm blessed that they're all integrated. But I was a classroom teacher for many years, and when I was in the classroom, one of my mentors, Linda Lantieri, who I know is a friend of yours, said to me, it's time for you to transition. We need you to play a bigger role in the field. And so I went on to get my admin credential, and I spent 5.5 years working in partnership with the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning to implement social and emotional learning systemically in the Oakland schools. And this was a really powerful learning experience to really figure out, we knew that we could do this at the school level, but can we do this in a large, complex urban system? And one of the things that I really saw boots on the ground was that you could have all the training for teachers in the world, you could have all the curriculum in the world, but if you didn't have leadership, particularly school leadership, that embodied an emotional intelligence and an equity consciousness, any type of innovation, any type of social emotional learning implementation was only surface level. And so this contributed to the founding of the organization I now lead, which I co-founded with Linda Lantieri and Daniel Reckstoffen, called Transformative Educational Leadership. And Transformative Educational Leadership is a beloved community of educational leaders who come together to really learn how to lead with love, and they experience beloved community through our fellowship, and then they go back and try and cultivate, they're architects of beloved community. And so our vision at Transformative Educational Leadership is that schools are beloved learning communities where every child is seen, valued, and belongs. And as I started really studying, beloved community, and for me, Thich Nhat Hanh's work in the world really is also very much about beloved community, and his connection and friendship with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Is a testament to that. And when I started really diving into the scholarship around beloved community and the practices, there's a real emphasis on compassion and radical love. And sometimes compassion and radical love, these concepts can feel abstract. They can feel so like really alleviating all suffering, loving everyone. And a few years ago, Sharon, in my own life and leadership, um, as I was really becoming more intimate with compassion-based practices and radical love, sometimes they felt like stars on the horizon, beautiful, but sometimes out of reach. And I really needed something that was immediate and accessible with my son, with my husband, with my colleagues, and even strangers, particularly, in recent years with a lot of the political polarization we've been experiencing. And that's when tenderness found me. And what I found is that it's so accessible. There's a somatic quality to it. When I think about tenderness, it's that softening of the edges, that melting of the heart when something touches us. It makes us want to reach out to connect and care, but it also allows ourselves to be reached. So I didn't really set out to study tenderness, Tenderness really found me, and it's become a lifeline, a way back to this embodied connection when things have felt hard.
Hmm. Staying with that topic for a moment, you've been involved with some evolving research at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, along with James Floman, PhD. And can you share with us some of what you've been working on there?
Yeah. Well, when I started to dig into the research, if you look up, tenderness in academic publications, almost all the references have to do with meat tenderizers or physical pain. And so, intuitively, I knew that there was something here. But as much as I'm intuitive, I'm also strategic. And James is an emotion scientist at Yale. He's also a contemplative, and he's a peer, a friend of mine. And so, a few years ago, we embarked on an academic study of tenderness, and we've now completed phase 1 of a multi-study research program really exploring tenderness as a distinct prosocial emotion. And so we have an academic paper forthcoming, in the spring. But one thing I wanted to highlight that's really interesting is that from our research, which has included, close to 1,000 subjects, we actually had a general sample and we have a contemplative sample as well, is that while there is a overlap with compassion, that from our research, we've really seen tenderness as a distinct emotion. And what we've found, from our work is something that we call the core 4, sort of our core tenderness model. And there are 4 elements of it, 4 elements that arise when we experience tenderness, and they're gentleness, genuineness, warmth, and interconnectedness. And I did mention, our findings show that tenderness is distinct from, but related to constructs like compassion and gratitude. And one of the facets of that is that because there is this very somatic quality to tenderness, and tenderness really links to prosocial outcomes, including relational gratitude, prosocial receptivity and motivation, kind of the motivation to offer help, but also to receive help. And so we're really excited that it's also correlated with social emotional health, a predictor of greater connectedness, resilience, and lower stress. And so, we're working on the paper right now, and hopefully we'll have something out there in the spring.
That would be fantastic. I also have a friend at Yale, Robin Stern, who's part of this.
Robin works with James. Yes, Robin and I
Yeah.
have connected on this. Yeah, Robin and I have been connecting about tenderness. And another thing I wanted to just share, kind of as we've been doing the academic research, I've also been in my living lab around tenderness. And a couple of things. First of all, for me, tenderness has this kind of fluid quality to it. If I think about the quality of tenderness, there's like a melting is sort of how I experience it. And this melting, this softening, this opening. And I've noticed that in my personal life, it is impossible for me to be judgmental and tender at the same time. I'm not able to have judgment. Being judgmental, being tender cannot coexist for me in my body. And that's profound when I think about parenting, teaching, relationships, and even, the work of bridge building and being an architect of beloved community. And so I'm really excited as we, build out the academic research, but also the specific tenderness-based, interventions or practices that are kind of the next phase of this work that James and I are doing.
Uh-huh. That's very exciting. I love it. If you Google it, when we Google something, the likely association is what tends to appear first, because so many people have searched for that very thing. That's what Google thinks, so to speak. You're looking for. So I'm told if you Google compassion, you see compassion fatigue. Because so many people are searching that. And I love that meat tenderizing is coming up.
Yes.
So often for tenderness. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Here we are. So I want to thank you so much for being with me today. It's lovely to reconnect, and it's lovely to hear about your work. It's very inspiring. And I'm hoping before we end that you can lead us in some kind of practice.
Yeah, well, I wanted to share two practices that are relational, and then I will offer
Yeah.
practice. So, the first practice is one that comes from the Plum Village tradition and the lineage of Thich, Nhat, Hanh, and it's the 3-breath hug. Do you know about this practice?
I don't.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to share kind of how it comes alive for me. And, you know, I do it almost daily with my son and with my husband. We try to do it daily. Need to get back on doing it daily. Um, but the way I practice it is when I'm with my son, I kind of pair each breath with a phrase I say to myself silently. And I don't yet share these phrases with him because they're really for me, but maybe when he's a little older, I do. So when we embrace, we take this deep first breath. In the first breath, I silently say to myself, I'm not going to be here forever because I'm not. Right? One of the only truths is that we will transition. I studied with a teacher once who said we start to die the day we're born. So that first breath, I'm not going to be here forever. And then that second breath, when I embrace my son, it's and you're not going to be here forever, particularly in this adorable and simultaneously frustrating 7-year-old body. But you're not going to be here forever. And then the third breath is, so let's cherish this moment we have. Every time I do this practice with my son or my husband, Sharon, it instantly brings me back to what matters most, and so that's a favorite one of mine. If you're already embracing your child or loved one, just adding these phrases. And there's a tenderness in that too. For me, it is very much a tenderness practice because tenderness is about connecting with the fragility of life, an invitation to live more deeply when we get in touch with that. And then the other practice I wanted to share is one I actually got from Dr. Becky, who is a well-known parenting educator out there. And this one my son loves. And for the past month, especially, I've been traveling almost every week for work, Sharon. It's been a rough phase that I've been in. But I'll say to my son, "Ooh, I don't know. Do you have enough mommy in you? Do you have enough mommy in you? Do you need mommy do you need to be filled up with mommy?" And again, this is my own kind of embodiment interpretation of this practice from Dr. Becky, but I'll embrace my son and I'll say, "Okay, I'm going to fill you up with mommy." And I'll say, "Where's mommy now?" And he'll say, "At my toes." I'll keep embracing it. We just did this last night, and it was a much longer fill up mommy. Sometimes this lasts 30 seconds. Last night, I seriously think that we were embracing for close to 5 minutes. And he's like, "Okay, mommy's at my knees. I'm filled up with mommy at my waist, at my belly button." I mean, last night when we were doing it, he was like, "Okay, mommy's, at my heart. Mommy," he even was like, "Mommy's at my eyelashes." And and then eventually he's like, "All right, mommy's in the trees. Mommy, I'm filled up with mommy." And that also has been a practice that he loves. That's a little more fun and joyful and playful. And so both of those are kind of relational practices that in my own life are anchors. And then the practice I'd love to offer to your listeners is also one that comes from the Plum Village tradition, and it's also my own kind of take on it. And so I think those of us that are parents, and even those of us that aren't, we can have those days where we might be in a spiral where, you wake up late, you spill your coffee, you might hit every red light. each unfavorable incident, can propel to another. And when I'm in one of those moments, I like to engage in what Thich Nhat Hanh calls the non-toothache meditation. Have you heard of this one, Sharon?
No, I have not.
Non-toothache meditation. So Thich Nhat Hanh would often remind us that when we are experiencing a toothache, we know that, not having a toothache is a wonderful thing. Yet when we don't have a toothache, we're still not happy. And, we have this habit, right, of focusing on pain. I mean, this is also connected to our negativity bias, right? We're like evolutionarily designed to pay more attention to the negatives and the positives. And unless we've engaged in a lot of mind training, even when we get some kind of relief, we're likely to shift our focus onto something else that's unpleasant. So the essence of this practice is to just invite us to be intentionally grateful and to focus on the fact that it feels good to not have a toothache. So that's just a little bit of background, and I'm going to just lead us in a very short practice that you can do anywhere, anytime, that we like to call non-toothache meditation. So I'm going to invite listeners to just see if you can get 5% more comfortable, whatever that means for you. And see if you can relax your shoulders, soften your face, release any tension from your jaw. And if it feels safe, you can gently close your eyes and begin to tune inwards toward your breathing. So breathing in, I am aware that I am breathing in. And breathing out, I am aware that I am breathing out. And just fully being with our in-breath and our out-breath. And as you tune inwards, I'm going to invite you to reflect on what is good right now. What is not wrong? What is good right now? And as what is good arises, really breathe that in. Thinking about that non-toothache. What is good right now? And really breathing whatever arises in your mind's eye, really breathing that in, soaking it in. And it could be small things, something as simple as I'm breathing, I am alive. Or big things, I have shelter, I have food. I know for me in this moment, I'm just so grateful to reconnect with you, Sharon. That feels really good. And to really have purpose and meaning. So really breathing that in. And whenever you're ready, if your eyes are closed, you can gently open them. And you can do the quick version for this, which is, the in the moment, just noticing when you might be caught in that negative spiral and needing to shift, and just taking a deep breath and gently bringing attention to what is good, what is not wrong right now. And just trying to feel that quiet pleasure of not having a toothache or whatever other pain or discomfort might be absent, and just holding that awareness for at least 30 seconds. And, no one needs to know what you're up to. And then more deliberately, when you have time, really deliberately and regularly taking time to write down what is not wrong, what is good in your life right now, and then really focusing on each thing and feeling it fully. in your body. So that's a little window into how I practice the non-toothache meditation.
Wow, thank you so much. All three practices were really wonderful. And thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story and all the inspiring work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. It's just wonderful to reconnect with you. And I will, never forget that first moment being in your presence almost 20 years ago in India. And your teachings on faith, they really have had a lasting impact on my life.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, folks. Thanks so much for listening. If you're still here, you've come to the end of the podcast. So if you'd like to learn more about Meena's work, you can visit her website at meenasrinivasan.com. That's MEENASRINIVASAN.com. And if you'd like to pre-order a copy of Kind Karl, A Little Crocodile with Big Feelings, you can head over to SharonSalzberg.com. This has been the Metta Hour podcast, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you live with ease.